Welcome to the afternoon drive. And speaking of that, I plan on doing 2 videos a day on my drive, and that's usually Monday through Thursday, and then any other videos that I get around to doing on the other days. So if this is interesting to you, if I'm interesting, if the information's interesting, if it's something you want to get involved in, subscribe. I think that'd be really cool, and I'd like you to jump in on the comments, send me a message, whatever it is that your thoughts on the things that I'm talking about, agree, disagree, questions, concerns, comments. And speaking of that, also, as I'm brainstorming ideas of things that I can talk about, I'm trying to be really careful that I'm not being preachy. It's not what I'm going for here. I don't want to try to sound like somebody who's sitting on top of a mountain throwing down wisdom, because I've seen it all. Certainly haven't. I feel like I've seen a lot and I have a lot to offer. But sometimes this conversation style, vlogging of just click the button and go and little post-production, like I'm not looking for really awesome produced videos. Like, it's just me driving in my car and just talking through some things, throwing out my ideas, my thoughts, but also my concerns. And this is just as much for me as it is for anybody else, talking through subjects and trying to gather my thoughts, and hopefully my thoughts are valuable to you. So I'd love to hear your feedback, your ideas, and feedback for me, for the ideas, other things that you want to talk about, questions, concerns, comments you might have. What are you struggling with? What do you do well? Like, we're not always trying to fix broken things here either. We want to have interesting conversations. So, if it's something you're interested in, throw it out there. And so, in the idea of not being preachy, I do have a take on the idea of there are no sacrifices, only decisions. And this goes to not only that idea of illusion of choice, developing your character, deciding on your goals, values-based goals, so that you can live an intentional life rather than just kind of floating through. And if you're searching, that's okay. You don't have to have everything figured out. But having some type of idea. So that's one of the challenges that I faced when I was really young. I was a early father in my 20s, young father in my 20s, that I had the idea of things that I didn't want to be. Right? And I think a lot of people have that. You have examples of people that did things right, and what did they do right? But then you also have a lot of examples of people that did it not so good, and the examples of what they did that you didn't like. And that is what drove a lot of my decisions. I don't want to be like this person. I don't want to act like this person. I don't want the results of this person. And so a lot of my motivation, a lot of my examples were actually negative. They were bad. I don't want to be like this. The problem with that line of thinking is I didn't really have an idea of what I actually wanted to be. I didn't have an idea of where I wanted to go, what I wanted to become. And so not only did I not have a clear definition, I also only had those examples of what I didn't want to be. And when you look, wherever your attention goes, that's what's going to grow in your mind. And even though I had identified as things that I didn't want to be, I ended up doing some of those things and becoming some of that I didn't want, because I didn't know where I was going and who I wanted to be. And so my brain only had those things to latch onto. And so I still made a lot of those mistakes. And that took me a very long time. And when I had that realization is when my life really started changing for the better, because I was actually going towards something. It wasn't just about running from something. You can't, I don't care if it's sports or business or personal life or relationship or self-help, you can't have an effective outcome if you don't actually define the outcome? What does success look like? And that goes into character development. Who do you want to be? What do you want to stand for? That's why values-based goals are so important. If you want to do something, that's great, but why do you want to accomplish that? Not only is it going to be more meaningful and relevant, but it's going to help define who you are. And you're less likely to succumb to daily preferences. Live principles, not preferences. Well, if you don't have the principles defined, how do you know what daily decisions you make? And so there's no such thing as sacrifice. Oh, I can't do this if I want to do this. Well, yeah, it's the illusion of choice. The bigger your goals, the more defined your character, the fewer decisions you have. Because, and I use it, it sounds obnoxious, but it's a very vivid example of, if I want to be a really good dad and I want to be a really good spouse, that means that I don't get to go get drunk on random weekdays or weekends and sleep around. That's no longer an option. And people are like, well, you shouldn't be doing that anyway. Well, yeah, but people end up doing that because they're not defining those things. You are not creating a list of required and no longer available behaviors. And at some point, it might creep in of, justification of, oh, she did this, or my life is this, and this will make me feel better. And it might not even be a thought process. It could be a heat of the moment decision because you haven't defined it, or because you're going to justify the behavior because you're being emotionally reactive. You end up finding yourself in those situations. That's how those things happen. I don't believe a lot of people plan on having affairs in marriage, or even if you're not married, you're in a dedicated relationship. But things happen. You justify them. You are emotionally reacting to certain things. And so while the example seems obnoxious, it's valid. Because if I don't say, I want to be this, I want to be a great husband, and now working with the rugby teams that I work with, one of the things we talk about is you have to define what are the above the line behaviors and below the line behaviors. Above the line behaviors, this is the line. You now have to do all of these things. So working with my student athletes, you have to go to class. You have to do your homework. You have to get acceptable grades, good grades. The higher the better, obviously, but I'm not going to demand A's. What I'm going to say is I want you to do your best. If you're getting a B- and you know you could do better, why aren't you doing better? Why not? Why aren't you applying yourself? Because how you do one thing is how you do everything. Why aren't you applying yourself to get a better grade? It's not about getting a better grade. It's about applying yourself and doing your best work. Because if I can't trust you to go to class and do your work to 100% effort, how do I know you're going to give your best effort all the time in the weight room, on the field, in the classroom, watching film? The habits start creeping in. And if you allow bad habits, those bad habits will populate themselves in other areas of your life. And so you have the above the line behaviors. Here's all the things that you now have to do. And below the line behaviors, these are the things that you are no longer allowed to do. Start with the obvious ones. I want to be a great husband. Therefore, I can't flirt and mess around, even if it seems innocent. I'm no longer allowed to actively involved in flirtation. Why would I? If I want to be a good husband, why would I even entertain the idea of something like that? It's no longer acceptable. I can be friendly. There's nothing wrong with being friendly, but only I know where the line is crossed. And there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is actually a pretty good guiding idea. I don't even know what I'm trying to say there. Because the more defined things are, if you feel guilty, it's because you're doing something that is contrary to your morals, values, and principles. You feel guilty because of a behavior. And that's the difference between guilt and shame. I feel guilty because I behaved a certain way. If I'm feeling shame, it's because I'm judging my character. I'm such a bad husband. Well, you're only a bad husband if you're having bad behavior, right? So the shame is essentially character assassination, which is not healthy. Focus on the behaviors. If you want to criticize anybody, that goes into harsh conversations of, conflict resolution, whether it be relationships or work or whatever. If you really want to be effective in communication, focus on behavior. So focus on your behavior and say things like, I'm not a bad husband. I'm making bad decisions. So therefore, if I want to be a good husband, these are the behaviors that I need to show. And therefore, if I follow the behaviors that would reflect my values of being a good husband, I'm not going to feel guilty anymore. Right? It's simple, not easy. Don't confuse simple with easy. These are simple concepts we're talking about. But people are emotional, and the more you are susceptible to these things, the more likely you are to do them. So how do you remove the susceptibility? You define more things. It's not about sacrificing all the other women in the world and all the other opportunities that are out there. No, I am making a decision. That is the difference between a victim mentality and an action-oriented accountability. I am deciding that other women are no longer an option because I want to be a good husband, because this is the woman that I love, this is the woman I want to be with. That is a decision, not a sacrifice. So you can apply that to a lot of things. And really, you could ultimately say there are no sacrifices. You make a decision and you stick with that decision based off of what you say you want to accomplish and who you want to be. Keep it simple. So a challenge to you is, have you defined to that degree who you are, what you stand for? What are the values that you have in your life? What are your goals that you want to achieve that are based off of your values and based off of who you want to be and what you want to represent and the things that you want to accomplish? What are the behaviors necessary you now have to do? And what are the behaviors that are no longer options to you? You will then have fewer conflicts in your life. Because when you're having a difficult day, whether it be struggling with something, or my partner and I are struggling with something, even though we might be upset at each other, we know that the goal, the productive outcome, is to have a good, solid relationship. So therefore, when I feel guilty, or when I feel upset, justified in yelling, I can say that's no longer an acceptable behavior. I don't get to yell at my spouse anymore. Fail at that every once in a while. We get into arguments, I raise my voice. But it's often a quick conversation of, hey, we decided we weren't going to do that anymore. And I acknowledge, and I'll either calm down in the moment, or I'll say, okay, fine, I need a couple minutes. Go calm down, and then I'll come back and I'll be more rational because I'm getting the emotional side under control. But I'm only able to do that because I have very clearly defined my above the line and below the line behaviors. So think about that. Give me your feedback. Let me know what you think about this idea of there are no sacrifices, only decisions.